First meeting to order, and seated tonight we have Ryan Deasy, Chuck Shee, and myself, Ben Philbrook, Fred Teichman, Lynn Conway. Marge Salinger is out of town, and Gary Delphi and Andy are with us as well. Thank you.
Well, it looks like first up we have the minutes of the February 15th meeting.
Motion to approve?
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Well, under commission reports, item 5B is preliminary discussion regarding forthcoming local decisions on recent state statute changes governing accessory dwelling units and residential parking regulations as per Connecticut Public Act 2129. So the purpose of the discussion is to try to gauge the commission's opinion on the issue of conforming or opting out of new state statutes on accessory dwelling units and residential parking standards. Connecticut Public Act 2129 was approved by the General Assembly late last year and was effective October 1st. The Act's primary goals were to reduce regulatory barriers to housing affordability and limit zoning's role in racial and economic segregation. The Act includes two sections that gives communities the option to opt out of specific requirements. And the Commission and the Board of Selectmen will have to decide whether to abide with the language of the statutes or decide to opt out as spelled out in the Act. The first topic with this is accessory dwelling units. As part of the effort to increase housing affordability in the state, the statute requires towns to allow accessory dwelling units on any property with a single-family dwelling. While the town liberalized its accessory dwelling units regulation back in 2018, the state act is more permissive than that. The state statute does not require a minimum house size like we do, minimum lot size, and it doesn't require special use permits for newly constructed detached residences. It also doesn't prohibit them in front of the primary residence as the town does. So with this, the accessory dwelling unit statute, the town can either formally amend its zoning regulations to comply with the state or opt out of these requirements by January 1st, 2023. And the way you opt out is the commission will have to hold a public hearing before then and pass a decision to opt out by supermajority, 4 out of 5 vote, and the Board of Selectmen would have to pass a supermajority vote to opt out. You'd need both of those. The other topic here is dwelling unit parking requirements. The statute says that in order to prevent towns from having excessive parking requirements for multifamily construction, that communities can no longer require more than 1 parking space for each 1-bedroom unit or studio units, and can't require more than 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit of 2 or more bedrooms. This is less of a parking requirement than we typically have in our zoning regulations. Most zones require 2 spaces per unit, period, without regard for the bedroom size. And if it's multifamily, you typically also have to provide guest parking at a rate of 1 space for every 4 units. So towns can opt out of this requirement also. Unlike the ADU statute, for one thing, this section's already effective. So if someone applied right now for something, they would go by this lesser parking standard. And unlike the ADU statute, there's no timeline for opting out. The town could opt out 10 years from now if it wanted to. So same opt-out process though. Commission would hold a public hearing, have to pass it by a supermajority vote, and then the Board of Selectmen would have to do the same thing.
Keith, with the no time limitation, if there was accessory dwelling units in play during that period, would they be grandfathered in if
Well,
10 years from now the town decide to opt out?
with the,
It's the parking.
right,
Right,
just the parking has no time limitation.
right.
The accessory dwelling unit one, we'd have to do by January 1st.
Is it possible to opt out in parts? Can we opt out of certain provisions and accept others? I mean, I'm thinking about accessory dwelling units on a 1/10 of an acre lot in one of the villages.
Right.
In the, out in the front row. Might be something we'd want to think about, but overall, the provisions aren't all that bad. So can we pick and choose? Can we opt out
I
of
don't think
some?
so based upon the language. There's language in that statute that says towns can't have additional requirements that aren't in this section. So I think if the town wants its own, more carefully crafted regulation like that, it'd be best to opt out. And you could include things from the state statute that you like, if we
So
want to change things.
Opt out and then perhaps amend our own.
Yeah,
provision.
which, we might do with we have the comprehensive zoning rewrite coming anyway. So if the commission does opt out, that rewrite could also look at accessory dwelling units.
Right, okay, thanks.
Should we talk to the Board of Selectmen about if we decide to opt out, to see if they want to?
And that's what I don't know. I don't know what they think of this, and let's say this commission all wants to opt out. I don't know if they would feel the same way.
So should we schedule a public hearing and, get input from the general public about what they would want to do before we decide anything?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Well, we'd have to hold the public hearing to opt out. Did you mean hold one before that?
Well, make a proposal to opt out and then hold a public hearing and see what people say.
Yeah.
Should it be a joint public hearing with the Board of Selectmen?
If they would like to do that, yeah.
What do you think, George?
Point of order.
Yes.
I was just hoping to maybe get a little bit more information from staff, a little better description on what the specific provisions would be in the new state statute, particularly compared to our own regulations, which I'm not too familiar with the changes we made in 2018. I'm just not clear on what actually is allowed now with respect to bulk requirements and so forth, and what would change.
Yeah, it's a good.
The second part of the question, quickly, is has anything to do with conducting since the regulation change to see what the results?
What the results have been as far as people. Well, housing affordability is also an issue, but since 2018, there have been about 23 accessory dwelling unit applications approved. I can't tell you, though, how many of those wouldn't have been approved before that regulation changed. Because we did allow accessory dwelling units prior to 2018, it was just a lot more strict with who could do them. But yeah, it's a good point as far as, our regulation versus the states. Basically, our accessory dwelling unit regulations now say that most houses can have them, but you need a house of at least 2,000 square feet to start. So that doesn't allow people with smaller houses to do it. You also need the minimum lot size in your zoning district to do it. In the state statute, doesn't require either of those things. You can have a house of any size, you can have a lot of any size.
You can put it anywhere on the lot.
Yeah, as long as you have to meet the zoning setbacks.
But they still have to meet the other bulk requirements.
Right. Right, but not lot size. The town requires a special use permit if someone constructs a new detached accessory dwelling unit from scratch. So far, since 2018, no one's done that. Although people have put them in existing garages and barns. The town doesn't allow detached accessory dwelling units in front of a house in cases where a house is pushed back from the road. And the state statute would allow for that. The state has more flexibility as far as the minimum and maximum size of the unit. And the town has a few other requirements that basically we'd have to get rid of if we adopted the state's.
So wouldn't it make some sense from a sort of a procedural point of view to propose to opt out, set up a public hearing, get all the input we can get, and then if we do decide to opt out, then use the rewrite of the regulations to perhaps consider some of the state requirements, but not all?
Make it a hybrid.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean,
That makes sense to me.
I don't think all of the state requirements were bad,
No.
but.
I agree.
But that would seem to me to be a way to proceed that would get lots of input, gets lots of opportunity to think about it, and, see what happens.
Yeah,
From the
that's-
standpoint of just making a decision to opt out, it might look like it's exclusionary, but we already have a regulation that permits it, which is very inclusionary. In my experience, working in a lot of other jurisdictions, like Stonington and a broad range of towns, there are very few towns that permit accessory buildings like we do. So we have sought to be inclusive, not to be, to just exit out. So I think from the perspective that we're trying to be exclusionary, we're not, because we already permit it, where most jurisdictions do not. And I agree with everything you said. I think that there are provisions that are very good in the state's regulations that would make our regulation better. And some things that, quite frankly, would be a financial burden, like the wastewater provisions that a house that comes in does not have to pay a connection fee to the sanitary sewer. That's a burden to everybody else who's paying sanitary user fees in town, even though it's an unpleasant subject, I know. But there are things that in there that I don't agree with and things that I do agree with. So I think we pick the things that are good and make our regulation better. And again, we're already inclusive as opposed to trying to exclude.
So the trick will be to frame it so it doesn't sound like we're trying to be more exclusive. Somehow frame the proposal, if you will, in a fashion
Should you
that,
include in the proposal that, okay, we want to opt out of the state, but, go forward and incorporate
Yeah.
some of what was in the state into
Yeah.
our own
Should we
specific-
try to draft a regulation? Should we try to have some sort of a model spec to what we like? And say, these are the provisions we like and we'd like to modify, but we're in the process of a general rewrite. But this is the direction of what a new regulation might look like. I mean, that may make it more difficult, but it may send a better message that we're not being exclusionary, we're being inclusive.
I
makes it
think
more
it would be
positive.
really good for the public hearing to have a kind of a graphic that says, here are all the things listed for the state, here are the things that we have, X out where we're together, where we're not, make it very clear, right? And I also think it would be good to know what other towns have, to your point, Chuck. So, pick 5 towns throughout the state that have similar profiles as Stonington and say, what do they have in place now? And break it down using that same graphic, because I think when you go out to the general public, it's good to have a framework to discuss and to make sure everybody's on the same page, and that they can reference as we go back and forth.
Yeah, and what other towns are doing is in flux because they're all having the same discussion now about whether to
Right.
opt out or not. I know Montville has just opted out. Waterford's considering it.
Would be interesting, it would be
And do they have something
interesting,
in place already? Does Montville already have something in place, or are they planning to just opt out? See, those are the
I'm not
questions that I
sure,
think
yeah.
you need the answers to.
Right. Yeah, it'd be good to have a better picture of what people will be doing.
is there a way, Keith, to find out how many towns of the 169 towns in Connecticut permit accessory buildings in town? It'd probably be a difficult question, but I bet you'd find out it's very few,
Exactly.
very few.
Maybe that information might be out there, like already
Maybe through
calculated.
the regional governments, we could ask that question. Because it's gonna be very few, and opting out when you already have a regulation versus opting out when you don't allow it is, I think, are two different things.
Yeah, I mean,
But
we'd
I
be
do agree
opting
with
out.
I agree with what you said, that it would, if we could show, here's what our regulation permits, and sort of borrow from what Keith already did, show a comparison between what the state regulation overlaid on ours does.
It's a simple bullet point graph.
Yeah.
That could be
It
a
isn't just as-
access. It'd be pretty simple to throw together, I think.
There were a lot of other requirements with regard to layout that, if a house is served by sanitary sewer, putting an accessory building on it is easier than a house that has a subsurface septic system. I think in this case, you'd have to have a separate septic system for the house. I don't think you could share a septic system. The state health code wouldn't allow it. So you'd have to, that's exclusionary right out of the gate. There's a lot of people that can't put an accessory building on because there just isn't enough room, even on a 1 acre lot. You have a hard time siting a house that's a 3,000 square foot house, has to have a reserve area and a primary leaching area. And that fills, and it has to be those two areas have to be 75 feet away from the well. So you start now having to put 2 septic systems on a lot, and it's impossible. It's impossible. So this is a different game for people that are on a public water and public sewer lot than it is for people that are on a septic system lot. But I still think that graphic that you talked about is a good thing to have up there. This is what we have, this is what's proposed. And we want to charge our land use consultant to develop something that borrows the best from the state and incorporates it into ours to make it a better regulation. But we already have one.
And I do think, Chuck, your point, like, that's something that I personally would not have thought through. Those are the kind of things that I think people need to understand.
Yeah,
Because in reality, then that then can go into another tangent on what the town is doing with its public sewer and water. Because now you've turned it into a whole new ballgame where you can have rental property, et cetera, but you can't when you've got 5 acres on such and
That's
such
right.
road, right? So I do think that that's an important thing for the selectmen to consider as well, selectmen office, when it comes to revenue, et cetera. So it's not just,
there's a lot of dimensions to this, there really is.
And the parking, I think if we were going to handle both topics with one public meeting, I think it would be important to think about the various areas within Stonington that could absorb additional dwelling units without requiring additional parking. You know, downtown Mystic, for example, parking's already at a premium. If you were to then say you don't need to account for parking areas, et cetera, you know, that could cause other major issues. So I do think that that's got to come out too in the discussion.
I think it's a good idea to bill the public hearing as a comparison between existing statutes and those suggested by the state. I do think there's some merit to going a little bit more stateside on some of the issues. If that's going to be a new standard within the state, I think the town would feel comfortable maybe adopting them selectively, but I do think it's smart to write our own version and opt out, but the billing of the public hearing should definitely be done more as a comparison before opting out.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are,
Ready to go?
we're not, you know, one of these towns that are just opting out to prohibit these things. We're opting out to keep the regulation that we already have, which does allow it.
Since we are hoping to do a busy spring, so it'll have to be pushed into the summer.
Yeah, I would think so. It is the consensus about the having a public hearing to opt out of the parking requirements also?
I would say yes. Yeah. to include
I
them
think they
both.
go hand in hand, they
Yeah.
have to go hand
Yeah.
in hand.
I agree.
Okay.
Does the state statute control that on the accessory dwelling?
No, not until January 1st, but it does now on the parking.
So yes, if somebody applied now, the state parking would take precedent.
Precedent,
Right,
Or not?
right. All right, so
Okay.
Yeah.
public hearing to opt out for
Great.
both. Yeah, that's what I was looking for with this discussion. You know, the consensus here of which direction to go. The two agenda items under old business, recommend tabling those until the next meeting. This is the bond release request for Old Mystic Estates and Sea Research Foundation, which leads to the public hearing for cannabis moratorium.
I'm curious as to why this bonding keeps getting put off. It seemed to be pretty simple.
Yeah, the main thing is waiting for comments from the town engineer, which are usually the main
okay,
factor.
okay.
And the work that they do on the site keeps changing too. They keep ticking off more of the items
Okay.
that they're supposed to do.
We keep seeing it.
Right.
We keep tabling it.
So, you know, to that point, I think we talked last time about this bonding issue. You're gonna present when we do actually discuss it and make a decision. These were requirements, and then this is what's been done to this point.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's been there for a couple months now, and if they keep on ticking off boxes, it makes me think that originally they didn't have enough boxes ticked to get the money back. Which we saw the last time we had something like this come forward to us.
Right.
Right, okay.
Wait for the public hearing then?
Oh, sure. We haven't been reading this. Do you want me to read it?
Oh, yeah, no?
Okay. Pursuant to the general statutes of the state of Connecticut, revision of 1958 and all amendments thereto, and pursuant to the zoning regulations of the town of Stonington, Connecticut, the Planning and Zoning Commission hereby give notice that it will hold a public hearing at the Stonington Board of Education District Office, 40 Field Street, Pawcatuck, Connecticut, on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at 7 p.m. on the following applications. PZ 02RA, Town of Stonington, PZC zoning regulation text amendment application to enact a temporary moratorium on cannabis establishments so that regulations for these uses can be developed and adopted.
Thank you. Seated tonight, we have Ryan Deasy, Chuck Shi, myself, Ben Gilbert, Craig Dykeman, and Lynn Conway. The sign-up sheet in the front of the room. Once we hear from the applicant, the public may speak opposed, in favor, the general comments, followed by the town in this case, the staff input, questions and discussion on our end, and then we'll close the hearing with discussion of the vote.
Thanks. So this application is a zoning regulation amendment request that's submitted by the commission. The application would change the language of the zoning regulations to have a temporary 6-month moratorium on cannabis establishments or applications for cannabis establishments so that regulations for these uses can be developed and adopted by the town. Last year, the state approved Public Act 22-1, and that was the act concerning regulation of adult use cannabis, which the 300-page act had a lot of provisions regarding cannabis use in Connecticut. And a small amount of those dealt with land use compared to other issues. But basically it says that unless otherwise provided for in the zoning regulations, towns should treat cannabis establishments similar to non-cannabis uses like retail or manufacturing or that sort of thing. But towns can adopt zoning regulations for these different types of cannabis uses and have different criteria for them and allow them only in certain zones or prohibit them altogether. Until June of 2024, Stonington can only have one retailer and one micro cultivator due to its size. And the state might revisit that after 2024. So prior to deciding on a general course of action, this commission and the Board of Selectmen last year wanted to hear from residents on the issue instead of just jumping in and deciding. So the town held a public referendum on whether to allow cannabis establishments in town back in October. And as you know, that passed in favor of allowing these businesses by a majority of voters. Back on the January 4th meeting, this board decided that in order to have more time to adopt a fitting regulation, that we should adopt a temporary 6-month moratorium on cannabis businesses in town to give us more time. So that's what this public hearing is. It's just about the 6-month moratorium and not about the future cannabis regulation. So if this is approved, the effective date of the moratorium would be March 21st due to the appeal period and notification in the paper. And it would last until September 21st, 2022. The language of the moratorium is standard. It just says we won't accept these types of applications. The language was reviewed by the town attorney, who said it was acceptable. We also had comments from the police commission, who had no issue with the temporary moratorium, but they want to review any actual applications that come forward, which we would definitely do, and we would definitely have the cannabis regulation reviewed by the police commission also. And Regional Planning Agency just said there was no intermunicipal impact from that. So if this is approved, the moratorium would be up September 21st. So we'd still have to move quickly to prepare and adopt the actual cannabis regulation. Looking to submit something maybe in April with a June or July public hearing for that regulation. to give time and a few meetings for that. And the new regulation would have its own appeal period before that's effective also. So we couldn't spend too much time just thinking about it for months. We'd have to apply for something pretty quickly. But that's it really for the moratorium. It's just sort of a 6-month stalling on the issue.
Keith, I noticed in the response summaries, the police commission wants to coordinate or have something to say about actual locations that are, I'm just assuming it means are approved for any use, so that they can look at issues with regard to traffic and parking and public safety. That's a pretty broad range of subjects. Do we have enough time with 6 months to coordinate all those issues with the police commission, or is that something that we're even going to try to do?
I think there'd be enough time. You know, my goal is to consult at least with the police chief before even submitting any sort of application, just to get their comments before we submit anything. And once we do submit, that would go to the full police commission, as most of these applications do for their comments. And once there is a regulation, when some business owner comes forward and says, I want to do it here, that would also go to the police commission where they can look at the specific traffic and public safety issues there.
Makes sense, thank you.
Any public comment? In favor? Opposed? General comment?
Just Keith, is the 6-month going to give you enough time to research what other towns have done, which I think was something we asked?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that's always changing, is what other towns in Connecticut anyway are doing, but it's also looking at other towns in Massachusetts and elsewhere.
Right.
Make a motion to approve the application?
I second.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Did we have to close the public hearing first?
Oh,
That's true.
What did we miss?
you got to close the public hearing first.
Oh, okay. I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor of closing?
Aye.
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 I'll make a motion to approve the application.
Thanks. And,
Second.
yeah, well,
Discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you.
and yeah, effective date of this is March 21st.
Oh, did you want to talk about?
I thought it might be useful just 2 minutes to talk about this rewrite of the zoning regulations. We have funding, finally, I guess after years and years of asking for it, to get the get some consultants in and rewrite the zoning regulations. And so 5 of us, Keith, Susan Cullen, who's Director of Economic Development, Dave Rathbun, Chuck Sheehan, and myself have been involved in this for, I don't know, a couple months now. Keith prepared a request for proposal. We got 5 responses to that. We evaluated those responses, chose an organization to do the work, and they're called FHI Studios in Hartford. We chose them mostly because we liked the detail of their work plan, and we liked their involvement both of the commission and of the public in the process, so that we don't spend a lot of time and effort getting to the end of all this and find out that nobody in town likes what we're doing. Anyway.
Have a bunch of workshops.
Yeah, there's a 18-month schedule. I don't know when this is going to start,
Have you been signed on yet?
but there's an 18-month schedule, and I've got a copy of it that I'm passing out, and you'll notice that it calls for a meeting with the commission every month, almost, for 18 months, and when we don't meet with the commission, we meet with the public. I assume that meetings with the commission are work sessions and not public meetings. Would that be true?
Yeah, I'll have to review that again and see what they meant by it.
But it's, once we start, we've got, as a commission, we've got an 18-month commitment if all goes according to plan. So I thought, you know, at least know that that's coming down the pike. And that's about it.
When do they plan on having the commission meetings?
Yeah, to talk about their progress and talk about what we want to see and so forth. One of the nice features is they're going to take our current regulations and reformat them without changing anything. And then we're going to talk about what changes we want to see in the regulations. So we're going to make what we have far more user-friendly, and then we're going to talk about whether there's changes to the regulations, zones, and what's allowed in zones, and all of that sort of thing toward the end of the process. Anyway, it should work. Lord knows we need to work on those regulations.
But Fred, I guess my question, sorry I wasn't clear. The Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, is that referring to this meeting? Or is it a separate meeting that we would meet with FIH to go over, for example?
That's the question. I mean, I envisioned it as a work session for the commission as opposed to a public meeting.
So separate from the normal schedule.
I would certainly hope so, because we can't.
Usually workshops,
Workshops.
workshop format.
Yeah, we can't do a public hearing every month on this for the next 18
Would
months.
that be a public hearing? Would be incorporated in our...
To our normal
This
meetings?
meeting,
or
this
separate?
Tuesday night meeting, or is it a separate
Oh,
meeting?
I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure yet. It'd be open to the public as long as it's a
Right.
business of this board, but yeah, I'm not sure. It might just be what this commission wants, if it's tacked on to a meeting like this, or if it's a separate workshop meeting.
Depends a lot, I guess, on what's coming along for public meetings.
Right, sometimes it's hard to, you know, give something like the zoning regulations any thought when you're dealing with 5 applicants before you.
Yeah. So, stand by. We don't know how this is going to work yet. But anyway, it's a good start to a project that's badly needed.
Just out of curiosity too, is there a tentative start date for when this process?
At this point, it's just sort of like, you know, the details of the contract between them and the town,
Okay. So okay.
but sometime over the next few months.
Okay.
Okay. That's all I have to say.
Thanks for.
Thank you, Fred.
For doing it as well.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's a big job. Thank you.
I think it's only started. I think this was the easy part.
It is.
Well, thank you in advance.
And I think I'm going to be traveling for the next 18 months.
Yeah.
Oh, that's you, yeah.
We'll see how you speak of FHI in a few months too. We'll see if it's still so.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Aye.
Thank you.
7:39. We can go listen to Joe.